Imagine a place, an island nation that is just absolutely blessed with massive ancient forests.
Right, incredibly rich natural resources.
Exactly, rich mineral deposits. And on top of that, literally hundreds of millions in foreign aid pouring in every single year.
Which is a massive influx of capital for any system.
Right. So, by all conventional logic, you sitting at home, you would expect this place to be an economic powerhouse or, at least rapidly developing.
Yeah, you would think so. It seems like a guarantee.
But the data tells a deeply counterintuitive story. A child born there today will only reach 44.3% of their full productive potential.
Yeah, a human capital index of just 0.443,
Less than half.
less than half of their potential. It's honestly just a staggering number to look at, especially when you contrast it against the sheer volume of wealth flowing into the country.
It really is. So for this deep dive, we are dissecting the development paradox of the Solomon Islands.
And it is a fascinating paradox.
It is. Our mission today, and we've pulled this from a massive stack of economic, demographic, and environmental data, is to figure out what exactly is happening here.
Right, because we need to know, are we looking at a classic resource curse?
Or is this a deeper, institutional trap?
Exactly.
Because we want to look past the surface level illusion of prosperity, the high aid, the rapid consumption of natural resources, and really understand the structural crisis that leaves human capital so shockingly low.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really grasp this, it helps to visualize the economy not as a static spreadsheet, but as a Sankey diagram.
Oh, I love a good Sankey diagram, the ones with the flowing arrows.
Yes, exactly. So you have these incredibly thick arrows on the input side on the left, hundreds of millions in official development assistance.
Like foreign aid.
Right, plus massive natural resource rents from extracting timber and minerals.
So huge inputs.
Huge inputs. But instead of flowing smoothly over to the right side into wide outputs like steady economic growth or human capital accumulation, it gets messy.
It just splinters off.
Yeah, the resources wildly fluctuate, or they just vanish through all these little leaks. The wealth isn't actually accumulating.
Well, before we figure out where the money is leaking, we really need to understand the physical and human reality of the board we're playing on.
Right, the baseline.
Because we are talking about an archipelago in the Pacific. And the demographic baseline here is incredibly challenging.
You really cannot decouple macroeconomics from geography. You just can't.
No.
In the Solomon Islands, we are looking at a population that is massively young.
Which creates a very high youth dependency ratio, right?
Exactly. This means the number of children, ages 0 to 14, is disproportionately large compared to the working age adults.
But wait, I want to challenge that framing for a second.
Sure.
Because in a lot of development economics, a youth bulge is treated like, well, a lottery ticket.
Demographic dividend.
Yeah, the demographic dividend. Look at the Asian tiger economies in the late 20th century. They used a massive influx of young people to industrialize rapidly.
They did.
So why is it a structural burden here rather than a dividend waiting to happen?
That's a great question. A demographic dividend only pays out if you have the infrastructure to educate those young people.
Ah, okay.
And, crucially, the labor market to absorb them once they actually graduate.
Right.
If you lack both of those things, that youth bulge becomes a massive strain.
Because they aren't working yet.
Exactly. The working adults and the government, they have to stretch a very limited tax base to cover pediatric health care, basic schooling, and food for a population that isn't contributing to the formal economy yet.
So it's all cost, no revenue, at least for now.
Yes. And the Solomon Islands faces a massive geographic multiplier on that cost.
Because of the rural dispersion?
Precisely. Because even though urbanization has crept up slowly over the decades, roughly 70% of the population still lives in highly dispersed rural areas.
And we should clarify, rural in the Solomon Islands doesn't mean like a farming town in the American Midwest connected by a 4-lane highway.
Not at all.
We are talking about hundreds of distinct islands separated by open ocean with incredibly difficult terrain.
It is a profound logistical hurdle. Think about the unit economics of public service delivery.
Okay.
If you want to build a school or staff a health clinic or even just maintain a reliable power grid.
Or pave a road.
Right, pave a road.
Mm.
The per capita cost just skyrockets when your population is scattered across an oceanic geography.
Because you can't centralize it.
Exactly. You aren't just building one large hospital in a dense urban center. You have to build dozens of microclinics.
And figure out how to transport doctors across the water.
Doctors, medicine, heavy equipment, it's exponentially more expensive.
So it's like trying to run a modern delivery business where all your customers live completely off the grid and your only product is whatever you can forage from the woods.
That is a very apt analogy.
Which means any economic engine they do have needs to be incredibly robust just to cover the baseline costs of existing.
Right.
But when we look at their economy, robust isn't the word that comes to mind.
No, it is not.
It looks incredibly fragile. Over 30% of their gross domestic product comes from the primary sector. So that's agriculture, forestry, and fishing.
They are heavily locked into raw extraction.
Just pulling things out of the earth and the water.
Yes. And the danger of an economy so disproportionately reliant on the primary sector is extreme volatility.
Because you don't control the prices.
Exactly. You are entirely at the mercy of global commodity prices, unpredictable weather events, rigid ecological limits.
Yeah.
The data shows that the annual growth rate of this sector isn't just fluctuating. It experiences massive whiplash.
Define massive.
We see periods where it swings violently from a 9% contraction, so negative 9% growth, to a 13% growth rate in a very short span.
That kind of whiplash makes long-term planning basically impossible.
Oh, completely impossible.
I mean, if the primary engine of your economy can shrink by nearly a tenth or grow by over a tenth with almost no warning, how does a government ministry write a 5-year budget for infrastructure?
They can't. It paralyzes state planning.
It has to.
If revenues crater by 9%, infrastructure projects are just abandoned halfway through. The money dries up.
And if they spike?
If they spike by 13%, the sudden influx of cash often overwhelms the administrative capacity to spend it efficiently.
So it just leads to waste.
Exactly. It gets mismanaged.
So the obvious question, and I think the question anyone listening to this deep dive would ask, is why stay locked in this cycle?
It's the multi-million-dollar question.
Right, because the standard textbook model of development suggests you use the initial windfall from selling your timber and fish to build factories.
You train workers.
Yeah, you move into secondary manufacturing or tertiary services. Why hasn't that structural transformation happened here? If they know relying on raw materials is this volatile, why not pivot?
Because moving up the value chain requires overcoming massive barriers to entry.
Like what?
Well, to transition from exporting raw, unpeeled logs to, say, manufacturing and exporting high-end furniture.
Right, capturing that added value.
Exactly. To do that, you need continuous electricity. You need deep-water ports with paved connecting roads. And you need a workforce trained in advanced machinery.
Which they don't have.
The volatility we just discussed prevents the infrastructure build-out.
Yeah.
And as we will explore later with the data, the human capital simply isn't there yet.
So they are effectively trapped.
Trapped at the bottom of the value chain.
But looking at the surface, there is still massive wealth moving around. I mean, the timber is being sold, the government is functioning on some level.
Yes. Money is changing hands.
To understand how the system is propping itself up despite this volatility, we have to look at what the data reveals about the illusion of wealth.
This is where we have to shift our lens from gross domestic product to adjusted net savings.
Okay, this is a crucial distinction. We aren't going to bore you with the standard definitions of GDP because anyone who follows economics knows GDP is doubly flawed when it comes to measuring actual prosperity.
It is a very blunt instrument.
If you burn your own house down and pay someone to clear the rubble, your GDP goes up.
Exactly. It measures transactions, not underlying health.
Right. So what is adjusted net savings doing differently?
Adjusted net savings attempts to measure the true wealth accumulation of a nation.
Okay.
It takes the gross national savings and subtracts the consumption of fixed capital.
So like your roads and bridges wearing out over time.
Exactly. It deducts mineral depletion, too.
Yeah.
And most importantly for the Solomon Islands, it deducts the immense cost of net forest depletion.
Let's define net forest depletion clearly, because it isn't just logging.
Right.
Logging can be a sustainable industry.
Absolutely. Net forest depletion measures the extraction of timber at a rate that mathematically exceeds the forest's natural ability to regenerate.
So you're cutting faster than it grows back.
Yes. If you selectively log and replant, your net depletion is zero.
Okay.
The data here shows that the adjusted net savings rate for the Solomon Islands drops deep into negative territory.
How deep?
Sometimes hitting negative 3% of gross national income, with some data points showing even more catastrophic structural deficits.
Wow. Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's like selling the copper wiring out of your own walls to pay for your grocery.
That is exactly what it is.
Your bank account looks full today. You have cash in hand from selling the copper. But you are systematically destroying the structure that keeps the lights on.
You're liquidating the house.
Tomorrow, you still won't have food, and now your house is unlivable. They are liquidating the country's biological capital to fund today's consumption.
And they're doing it at an unsustainable velocity. But the liquidation of natural assets is only one crutch.
There's another one.
Yes. The second crutch holding up this illusion of wealth is the extreme reliance on international charity.
The foreign aid.
We are looking at official development assistance, or ODA, scaling into the hundreds of millions of dollars annually from DAISY donors and multilateral institutions.
But wait, if a country is receiving an IV drip of over $300 million in some years,
Which is massive for an economy that size.
right, shouldn't that massive financial transfusion offset the environmental damage? Shouldn't that aid be building the infrastructure needed to escape the primary sector trap?
It absolutely should. But the data clearly indicates it is failing to convert into endogenous, self-sustaining growth.
It's not working.
Despite the massive aid, the country's per capita gross national income still experiences those violent double-digit swings we talked about.
So the aid is functioning as like a palliative care measure rather than a cure.
That's a grim way to put it, but accurate. It funds immediate consumption, disaster relief, or fragmented short-term projects. But it isn't rewiring the economic engine.
So if massive resources are being extracted, the forests are being liquidated for cash, and hundreds of millions in aid are flowing in from the outside.
Right.
But the true wealth of the nation, that adjusted net savings, remains deeply negative. Where's all this money actually going?
It is being absorbed by institutional friction.
The leaky bucket.
Exactly. We move from the inputs to the bucket itself. The World Bank tracks worldwide governance indicators, and for the Solomon Islands, the metrics paint a picture of severe systemic leakage.
Let's look at the actual numbers, because they are incredibly bleak. Control of corruption, which measures how susceptible the system is to graft and the private capture of public funds.
A vital metric.
It's chronically in the negative range, hovering around negative 0.35 to negative 0.20 for years. Its percentile ranking globally is just incredibly low.
And then you have government effectiveness.
What does that measure specifically?
This doesn't just measure policy on paper. It measures the actual quality of public services, the independence of the civil service from political pressures, and the government's ability to actually execute its own plans.
Okay, and the score?
This metric sits stubbornly around negative 1.11.
A negative 1.11, that is a massive red flag.
It is.
It indicates a state apparatus that is fundamentally struggling to deliver basic quality of life services to its population.
And on top of that, you have regulatory quality.
Right, the ability to formulate policies that actually promote private sector development.
That plummets below the 20th percentile globally in multiple tracked years.
Wow. So if we connect this to the bigger picture.
Right, think about the local entrepreneur.
Yeah, if you are a local trying to start a business that isn't just chopping down trees.
You face a volatile economy.
Non-existent infrastructure.
And a regulatory environment that is in the bottom fifth of the entire world.
The institutional friction is so high that it doesn't matter how much water you pour in.
The aid and the resource wealth.
Right. If the bucket is full of holes, nothing is retained. The wealth generated by resource rents and aid simply evaporates before it can reach the public.
It is a devastating cycle.
Now, I have to push back here, or at least ask for the deeper mechanism. And as a reminder to you listening, we aren't taking any political sides here. We are just reading the data impartially.
Just following the numbers.
Right. So is this just a capacity issue? Building a robust, transparent bureaucracy takes generations. Many developing nations struggle with this? Or is there something specific about the type of wealth they are generating that is actually causing the bad governance?
That is the pivotal question. And it brings us to the political economy of the classic resource curse theory.
Okay, break that down for us.
While capacity is definitely a hurdle, the structure of the Solomon Islands economy actually actively disincentivizes good governance.
Walk us through how that works.
Think about the fundamental social contract between a state and its people. Historically, for a government to survive, it has to tax its citizens.
Right.
To collect those taxes is forced to build a capable administrative bureaucracy.
You need accountants, you need records.
Exactly. And once citizens are paying taxes, they demand accountability. They say, hey, I'm paying you. I want roads, I want schools, I want security in exchange for my money.
The classic no taxation without representation dynamic.
Precisely. The need for taxation breeds political representation and institutional capacity.
Okay, so how does the resource curse break that?
Well, When a state can bypass its citizens entirely. When it can fund its operations just by signing a logging concession with a foreign extraction company.
Oh.
That social contract is completely severed. The government doesn't need to build a complex tax collection system.
Because the check just clears from the logging company.
Exactly. And more importantly, it doesn't need to invest in its citizens' education or health to make them productive taxpayers.
Because it doesn't need their taxes to survive.
The wealth flows directly from the foreign corporation to the state elites. The state becomes untethered from the population.
Which naturally degrades institutional quality.
Because the government doesn't need to be effective to stay funded. It just needs to keep selling the trees.
That is a chilling mechanism. The wealth itself makes the citizens economically irrelevant to the state.
It leads to institutional rot.
And because the institutions fail to capture and reinvest that wealth, the ultimate victim is the human capital of the nation. Which brings us back to that staggering 0.443 index score. Let's transition to the most devastating data in the source material: human capital and education. Because this is where the institutional failure becomes a generational tragedy.
It really is. We often visualize a national education system as a funnel.
Okay.
You want wide access at the top, bringing everyone in, and you want to carefully guide those students down into a skilled labor force at the bottom.
A pipeline.
Right. In the Solomon Islands, the funnel is completely ruptured. It's a sieve.
Well, at the very top, it doesn't look entirely hopeless. The primary gross enrollment rates show that kids are initially showing up to the schoolhouse.
The initial access is there, yes, but retention is an absolute disaster.
They don't stay.
The data reveals a catastrophic dropout rate and is particularly unforgiving for female students.
The gender disparity here is just glaring. The data points show female retention to grade 5 dropping off a cliff.
Sometimes plunging to the low 60s, or even into the teens, depending on the dataset year.
Wait, dropping into the teens by grade 5?
Yes. And for those making it to the final year of primary school, we see retention rates as low as 41.2%.
So well over half the girls are disappearing from the formal educational system before they even finish basic primary schooling.
It's devastating. And for the students who do physically remain in the classroom, we see a widespread prevalence of what is termed learning poverty.
Meaning they're sitting at a desk, but their reading and comprehension abilities fall well below minimum global standards.
Exactly. They are putting in the time, but not acquiring the cognitive tools.
Why? What is the specific mechanism breaking the learning process? If they are in the room, why aren't they learning?
It comes down to a massive deficit in teacher quality. A school system can never outperform the quality of its educators.
That makes sense.
The data indicates that only 53.5% to roughly 64% of primary school teachers have formal pedagogical training.
Barely half.
Barely half. It is even more alarming at the foundational levels. In pre-primary education, the proportion of female teachers who are actually trained drops to around 40% in some years.
Oh, wow.
Add to this a highly strained pupil-teacher ratio, particularly in lower secondary schools, where it hits 32-1, and you have a recipe for systemic failure.
Let's view this from the perspective of a rural family. I mean, if your local teacher isn't trained in how to teach reading,
Right.
the classroom is incredibly overcrowded, 32-1.
Yep.
And your child isn't actually learning anything useful, sending them to school starts to feel like a massive opportunity cost.
It is a purely rational economic decision for that family. Why lose a pair of hands that could be helping in the fields or watching younger siblings if the school is providing no tangible future value?
So they just pull the child out.
They do.
So what does this all mean? We have a factory where the machines, the teachers aren't calibrated. The materials, the students, fall off the conveyor belt. And the final product is a lifetime of unprotected labor. It's like building a suspension bridge, but stopping halfway across the gorge.
That's exactly it.
The children who fall off the edge don't just disappear into the ether. They land directly in the labor market. And because they are dropping out in the 4th or 5th grade, they are entering that market entirely unskilled.
Which structurally locks the economy. Because the education system fails to produce a skilled workforce, the labor market becomes dominated by what the International Labor Organization classifies as vulnerable employment.
Let's define that because it's a specific term. Vulnerable employment usually means self-employed workers or unpaid family workers.
Right.
They have no formal salary, no social safety net, no unions, no labor protections.
And once again, the gender divide is astronomical here. Women face an incredibly high rate of vulnerable employment. They are heavily concentrated in the informal agricultural sector.
Which means subsistence farming mostly.
Right. Roughly 35 to 42% of female employment is in agriculture. Conversely, their presence in secure, formal, or industrial sectors is almost zero.
They are essentially sentenced to a lifetime of unprotected, informal labor in the fields. And if the majority of your female population is locked in subsistence agriculture, you can never build that high-value manufacturing sector we talked about earlier.
The economy is completely starved of the very talent it needs to diversify. It's a lock-in effect.
But we have to recognize that the vulnerability of this population isn't solely economic. It is deeply physical.
Yes.
We move to the physical environment these citizens are forced to live in, which, according to the data, actively works against their development from day one.
Though there is some genuine progress to celebrate here.
Right, the health paradox. Over the past few decades, infant and neonatal mortality rates have dropped significantly. Fewer babies are dying in their first year of life.
That is a genuine public health victory, and it shouldn't be ignored. However, while the rate of survival has improved, the quality of that survival is deeply alarming.
How so?
We are seeing stubborn high rates of anemia among pregnant women, and most critically, a severe prevalence of childhood stunting and children being underweight.
We really need to unpack stunting, because it is often misunderstood as just a child being a bit short for their age. People think, oh, they're just small.
It is so much more than that. Stunting is a devastating biological marker. It is the physical manifestation of chronic malnutrition and recurring illness during the first 1,000 days of a child's life.
The most critical period of early development.
Exactly. It doesn't just permanently hinder physical growth. It fundamentally alters neurological development. A stunted child will have less brain volume, fewer neural connections, and a permanently reduced cognitive capacity compared to a healthy child.
So they are surviving birth at higher rates, but they are surviving to live in an environment that literally prevents their brains and bodies from fully growing.
They survive only to be structurally capped.
And the data shows this isn't just about a lack of calories, right? A child could be eating enough food, but still suffer from stunting.
Yes, and this is where it ties back into the broader systemic failure. The infrastructure deficit is the core driver here, specifically regarding sanitation.
Okay, the plumbing.
Right. There is a massive urban-rural divide. In the rural areas, where, remember, 70% of the population lives,
Yeah.
over 50% of the people still practice open defecation.
Over half the rural population lacks access to a basic toilet.
And that lack of sanitation infrastructure naturally contaminates the water supply. Unsafe water leads directly to chronic intestinal diseases and conditions like environmental enteric dysfunction.
Let's trace that biological loop for the listener because it's vital. A child drinks contaminated water and develops chronic gut infections.
Right.
Because their intestinal lining is constantly inflamed, they cannot absorb the nutrients from the food they eat.
The nutrients pass right through them.
The disease blocks the absorption, which causes the stunting, which permanently caps their cognitive development, which ensures they will drop out of school and enter vulnerable employment.
Everything is perfectly interconnected. The lack of a toilet today creates a 40-year macroeconomic deficit because that child will never reach their full productive potential.
It's horrifying when you map it out like that. And if the local microenvironment is hostile to the child's body, the macroenvironment is increasingly hostile to the nation's very survival. We have to look at the climate data.
The climate threat is immense. The Solomon Islands, as a Pacific archipelago, is incredibly vulnerable to climate change.
Rising sea levels, ocean acidification, extreme weather.
Exactly. Yet their industrial emissions are almost non-existent. They don't have heavy manufacturing or massive coal power plants.
Right, because they're locked in the primary sector, as we established, so their carbon footprint should be negligible.
It should be. However, the data reveals massive, sudden spikes in greenhouse gas emissions from a category known as LULUCF.
Which stands for?
Land use change, and forestry. In certain years, these emissions jump drastically, spiking to almost 7.95 million tons of CO2 equivalent.
Wait, where is an 8 million ton spike coming from if there are no factories?
It is the physical atmospheric footprint of the massive deforestation we discussed earlier. When you clear-cut ancient forests, you aren't just destroying future timber revenues. You are releasing massive amounts of stored carbon directly into the atmosphere.
So the liquidation of the forests is a double blow. It bankrupts the adjusted net savings on the economic balance sheet, and it accelerates the exact climate crisis that threatens to swallow the islands whole.
It is a perfectly self-destructive loop.
When you synthesize all these data points, you begin to see the architecture of what we can call the development flywheel of poverty.
The flywheel is a great way to visualize it.
Let's trace the mechanics of that flywheel so we can figure out how to break it.
Okay.
It starts with an economy completely reliant on primary resource extraction, chopping down trees and pulling fish from the sea.
And because the state funds itself through those resource rents rather than citizen taxation, it leads to weak, unaccountable governance, high corruption, and an inability to deliver services.
Because the governance is weak, the hundreds of millions in international aid leak out of the system. The aid fails to build infrastructure or fund human capital.
Because human capital is defunded, the education funnel collapses. Teachers remain untrained, girls drop out at massive rates, and children suffer from cognitive stunting due to poor sanitation.
Which produces an entirely unskilled, vulnerable workforce. And because the workforce is unskilled, the country cannot transition to manufacturing or high-value services.
So they have no choice but to rely on primary resource extraction.
The flywheel completes its rotation, spinning faster and digging deeper.
The diagnosis is undeniably bleak, but the data also points to the necessary interventions. If you are a policymaker or an international donor, how do you jam a stick in the spokes of this flywheel?
You can't just put a Band-Aid on a broken engine. The solutions have to be structural.
Absolutely.
So what is the first step?
First, you have to enforce transparent, rigorous governance over the forestry and mining sectors to stop the bleeding of natural assets. You must halt the net forest depletion.
Stop selling the copper wiring. Keep the wealth inside the house.
Exactly. By capturing and retaining those resource rents transparently, the state can boost its government effectiveness metrics and actually build a sovereign wealth fund or a dedicated infrastructure budget.
That makes sense. And then what about the aid?
The international aid strategy needs a radical pivot. Pouring ODA into short-term community projects or temporary relief doesn't change the underlying math. The data screams for a systemic overhaul of the education funnel, starting with the teachers.
Because if only 40 to 60% of your teachers are trained, nothing else in the education sector really matters.
Right. You have to take that international aid and laser focus it on pre-primary and primary teacher training. You have to make the classroom valuable enough that parents stop pulling their girls out of school.
Fix the funnel.
Because if you can keep those girls in school through secondary education, you unlock the third solution.
Empowering women in the labor market.
Yes, you must break the cycle of female, vulnerable employment in the agricultural sector.
If you educate that female workforce, you can begin shifting their labor away from informal, unprotected farming and into the service sector or primary processing.
Exactly. Instead of exporting a raw, unpeeled log, you have a trained workforce operating a mill to export finished lumber or furniture.
You unlock a massive demographic dividend by actually utilizing the potential of your entire population instead of leaving them stranded in subsistence farming.
The ultimate synthesis of this data is a necessary paradigm shift. The Solomon Islands and the international community supporting it must pivot entirely from an economic model based on extracting nature to a model based on investing in humans.
From extracting nature to investing in humans, that is the core takeaway.
It's the only sustainable path forward.
We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing the data of the Solomon Islands, diagnosing their specific flywheel. But I want you to think about your own context, your community, your local government, or even the company you work for.
The micro applications of this are everywhere.
They really are. How often do we celebrate a massive influx of cash, a good quarter, or a sudden windfall of resources, while entirely ignoring our own adjusted net savings?
We do it all the time.
If true wealth isn't the raw materials you dig out of the ground or the massive grant you just won, but rather the internal systems that convert those resources into actual sustained human potential. How many other places in our world are trapped in their own version of this exact same paradox?
It's a sobering question.
Something to think about until our next deep dive.